Half of your $2 million house is mine. Those were the first words my sister said to me less than 24 hours after my husband's military funeral. She stood on my front porch holding a stack of papers. My parents stood beside her, and for a moment, I honestly thought grief had damaged my hearing, because surely no one would say something like that the morning after a funeral, especially not after Robert's funeral, especially not family. But Karen wasn't joking. She looked me directly in the eye. "My son is your husband's child," she said, "and I have proof." Then she lifted a packet of papers. My father lowered his eyes. My mother folded her arms tightly across her chest, and I suddenly realized they already knew why she was there. I looked at the papers, then at my sister, then I smiled. Interesting. That was all I said. Because there are moments in life when a person becomes so shocked that anger doesn't arrive right away. The morning sun was warm, birds were singing. The American flag that had been presented to me at Robert's funeral was still sitting on the table inside my entryway. Nothing about the world looked different. Yet somehow everything had changed. My name is Linda Parker. I'm 67 years old. Until the day before, I had been married to Colonel Robert Parker for 43 years. Now I was a widow. The funeral had taken place at a veterans cemetery outside Raleigh, North Carolina. Hundreds of people had attended. Former soldiers, neighbors, church friends, veterans wearing faded service caps, men and women Robert had mentored decades earlier. Some drove for hours just to pay their respects. My husband wasn't famous, he wasn't wealthy, but he was respected. And for people of Robert's generation, respect mattered more than either fame or money. I can still hear the bugle playing taps. I can still see the honor guard folding the flag. I can still feel Robert's absence beside me. 43 years. Almost my entire adult life gone. By the time I arrived home after the funeral, I felt completely exhausted. Friends from church had brought casseroles. Neighbors stopped by. People called, people prayed, people cried. Eventually, everyone left. The house became quiet, too quiet. That night, I barely slept. Every room reminded me of Robert. His reading glasses sat on the nightstand. His favorite coffee mug remained beside the sink. His army photographs still lined the hallway wall. I woke before sunrise. For a few seconds, I forgot he was gone. Then reality returned. The silence felt heavier than anything I had ever carried. I made coffee. I sat alone at the kitchen table. And eventually, I decided to drive into town for a while. Not because I needed anything, because I couldn't stand being inside the house. When I returned less than an hour later, I saw a familiar SUV parked in my driveway. Karen's. I frowned. Then I noticed my parents' car. As I stepped out of my vehicle, I saw them. All three were waiting on my porch. Karen looked impatient. My father looked uncomfortable. My mother looked determined. Immediately, something felt wrong. Very wrong. I climbed the steps slowly. "What's going on?" I asked. Nobody offered condolences. Nobody asked how I was doing. Nobody mentioned Robert. Karen simply held out the papers. "My son is your husband's child." I stared at her. "What?" She repeated it calmly, confidently, as if she had rehearsed the sentence. "My son is Robert's child." Then she pointed toward the house, which means he deserves his share of the inheritance. I thought I had misunderstood. Her son Dylan was 19 years old. A good kid, quiet, polite, nothing like this mother. I looked at Karen, then at my parents. Neither of them appeared surprised. My stomach dropped. "You can't be serious." Karen immediately thrust the documents toward me. "DNA doesn't lie." Then she smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It was a victorious one. And that's when I realized something even worse. She hadn't come looking for answers. She had already decided she had won. My son deserves what's his. I looked down at the paperwork. The words blurred together. I was too stunned to focus. Then Karen pulled out another document. She waved it in front of my face. I even found a copy of Robert's will. My mother finally spoke. "Linda, maybe we should discuss this calmly." Discuss it calmly. The morning after my husband's funeral, my own mother wanted to discuss dividing up my husband's estate. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My father cleared his throat. If the boy is Robert's son, I never heard the rest. Something inside me simply shut down. Not from anger, from disappointment. At 67 years old, I thought family betrayal would hurt less. I was wrong. It hurt exactly the same. Maybe worse. Because by this age, you expect people to know better. Karen kept talking. Inheritance, rights, fairness, DNA, lawyers, money. The words blended together. And suddenly, I remembered something. 3 months earlier. Robert sitting in his study, a stack of documents on his desk, a strange look on his face. "If anything unusual happens after I'm gone," he had said quietly, "promise me you'll check the bottom drawer." At the time, I thought he was talking about financial paperwork. I hadn't asked questions. Now those words returned to me with perfect clarity. The bottom drawer. I looked past Karen, past my parents, past the front door, toward the hallway that led to Robert's study, and for the first time since this conversation began, I felt calm. Very calm. Karen mistook my silence for surrender. "Well," she asked. I smiled. "Interesting." She frowned. "That's it?" I nodded. "That's it." Then I walked past her, past my parents, and into the house. Behind me, I heard Karen calling my name. I ignored her. My heart was beating faster now. Not because I believed her story, because I suddenly remembered something my husband had wanted me to find. I entered his study. The room looked exactly as he had left it. His chair, his books, his desk, everything untouched. For a moment, I simply stood there, missing him. Then I opened the bottom drawer. Inside were folders arranged with military precision, tax records, property documents, insurance papers, and beneath them all, a large sealed manila envelope. My name was written across the front in Robert's handwriting. "Linda, open only if needed." I stared at it. Outside, I could still hear Karen talking, still hear her discussing inheritance, still hear my parents supporting her, but suddenly, none of it mattered because something told me my husband had seen this coming long before I had. And whatever was inside that envelope was about to change everything. For several seconds, I simply stared at the envelope. The room felt smaller somehow. Outside, I could still hear Karen's voice drifting through the open front door. She was talking loudly now, probably for my benefit, talking about inheritance, talking about rights, talking about lawyers, as if my husband had become nothing more than a financial opportunity, less than 24 hours after being buried. I sat down in Robert's chair. My hands rested on the envelope. His handwriting looked exactly as it always had, neat, deliberate, disciplined, military handwriting, the kind developed after decades of filling out reports and official documents. My throat tightened for a moment. I wasn't thinking about Karen. I was thinking about him, about the first time I met him, about the life we'd built together, about everything we'd survived. 43 years. People often ask what makes a marriage last that long. I don't think there's a secret. It's thousands of ordinary choices. Thousands of days when you choose the same person again. Robert and I met in 1979. I was a 2-3-year-old school secretary. He was a young army captain stationed at Fort Bragg. A mutual friend introduced us at a church picnic. He wasn't flashy, wasn't charming in the traditional sense, but he listened, really listened. When I spoke, I felt like the only person in the world. That quality never changed, not once. Over the decades, the Army moved us all over the country. Georgia, Kansas, Virginia, Texas, back to North Carolina. We raised children, buried parents, paid mortgages, faced illnesses, survived deployments, endured months apart, lived through every ordinary challenge life throws at people, and somehow emerged stronger. Robert believed in preparation for everything: storms, retirement, medical emergencies, unexpected expenses. Nothing made him feel more uncomfortable than leaving loose ends behind, which explained why I was now holding an envelope prepared months before his death. I broke the seal. Inside were several documents. The first was a handwritten letter. I unfolded it carefully. The date at the top shocked me. The letter had been written almost 2 years earlier. 2 years. Long before Robert's final illness became serious. Long before anyone expected him to die. I began reading. "My dearest Linda, if you're reading this, something happened that required you to open this envelope. I hope that's not the case, but if it is, please trust that everything inside was prepared to protect you." I stopped reading. My eyes filled with tears. Even after death, Robert was still trying to take care of me. I wiped my face and continued. The letter wasn't dramatic. It wasn't emotional. It sounded exactly like Robert. Calm, organized, direct. Several pages explained where important documents were located. Insurance information, bank accounts, veterans' benefits, legal contacts, the practical things he always handled. Then I reached a paragraph that made me sit upright. If Karen approaches you regarding paternity inheritance or financial claims, contact attorney Michael Benton immediately. Do not argue. Do not negotiate. Do not sign anything. Everything necessary has already been prepared. I read the paragraph 3 times. My heart began pounding. Paternity, inheritance, financial claims. Why would Robert specifically mention Karen? I quickly turned the page. A business card fell into my lap. Attorney Michael Benton, a local estate attorney. I recognized the name. Robert had mentioned him before. Beneath the card sat another folder. This one was marked confidential. I opened it. Inside were investigator reports, dozens of pages, photographs, timelines, interview summaries, financial records. The deeper I read, the more confused I became. Karen's name appeared repeatedly. So did Dylan's. And then I discovered something even stranger. Robert had hired a private investigator nearly 4 years earlier. 4 years. My husband had never told me. I felt a brief flash of hurt. Then I reminded myself there had to be a reason. Robert never spent money carelessly, especially not on private investigators. The reports described inconsistencies in statements Karen had made over the years, claims that changed, dates that didn't match, stories that contradicted one another. The investigator hadn't been looking for scandal. He had been verifying facts. The final report ended with one sentence highlighted in yellow. Further claims regarding Colonel Parker's paternity appear unsupported by available evidence. I stared at the page. Unsupported, not proven, not credible. The investigator had essentially concluded there was no basis for Karen's story. Yet Karen was standing on my porch claiming certainty, claiming she had DNA proof, claiming half my home. I continued searching through the folder. Near the bottom sat another sealed packet. This one contained legal paperwork, trust documents, property protections, updated estate records. Every document had been properly signed and notarized. Robert had revised almost everything, far more recently than the copy of the will Karen had waved around, which meant something important. The document she possessed was outdated, very outdated. She either didn't know that or she hoped I didn't. Suddenly, several pieces began falling into place. Karen had arrived with confidence. Too much confidence. She expected me to panic, expected me to surrender, expected me to believe she had all the information, but she clearly didn't. I heard footsteps outside the study. Karen again. Linda. I remained silent. A moment later, she appeared in the doorway. Why are you hiding in here? I'm reading. She crossed her arms. Well, what? Do you believe me? I looked directly at her. Years earlier, I would have recognized the signs, the impatience, the defensiveness, the desperation hidden beneath confidence, but grief had blinded me recently. Now, I saw them clearly. I haven't reached a conclusion yet. Her jaw tightened. You saw the DNA results. I glanced at them. They prove everything. Maybe not. I didn't say that aloud. Instead, I folded Robert's letter and placed it back inside the envelope. Karen took a step closer. Linda Dylan deserves what's his. There was something interesting about that sentence. She always said Dylan deserved something. Never that Robert deserved recognition. Never that the truth deserved acknowledgement. Always money, always property, always inheritance. I noticed it for the first time. And once I noticed it, I couldn't ignore it. I'll review everything, I said. When soon? How soon? I stood. The conversation was over. Karen seemed disappointed. She wanted a fight, wanted tears, wanted outrage. Instead, she got patience. That frustrated her. Robert used to say something during difficult negotiations. The person who becomes emotional first usually loses. Karen was emotional. I wasn't. Not anymore. After she finally left the study, I picked up Attorney Benton's card. Then I picked up the phone. The receptionist answered immediately. When I explained who I was, her voice softened. Mrs. Parker, Mr. Benton asked us to expect your call someday. A chill ran through me. Expect my call someday. Not if, someday. As though Robert had prepared for this years ago. She scheduled an appointment for the following morning. I hung up slowly. Then I looked around the study. The afternoon sunlight streamed through the window. Dust floated through the beams of light. For the first time since the funeral, I felt something stronger than grief. Not anger, not revenge. Certainty. Robert had seen something I hadn't. He had prepared for something I didn't understand yet. And tomorrow, when I met his attorney, I had a feeling I was finally going to learn exactly what it was. The next morning, I drove to Attorney Michael Benton's office with Robert's envelope sitting on the passenger seat beside me. The building was located in a quiet business park outside Raleigh. Nothing fancy. A brick office complex with neatly trimmed shrubs and a small American flag near the entrance. Robert would have approved. He always distrusted flashy people. As I walked through the front door, the receptionist immediately recognized my name. Mrs. Parker, she said gently. Mr. Benton is expecting you. That sentence still felt strange. Expecting me? As though my husband had somehow reached forward through time and scheduled this moment. Michael Benton turned out to be a man in his early 60s with silver hair and calm eyes, the kind of attorney who looked more like a trusted neighbor than a courtroom shark. When he shook my hand, his expression softened. I'm very sorry about Robert. Thank you. He was a good man. I nodded. The lump in my throat returned immediately. Even now, hearing people speak about Robert in the past tense felt wrong. We sat down. I placed the envelope on his desk. He glanced at it inside. So he said quietly, Karen finally made her move. I stared at him. You already knew. His expression told me everything. Robert was concerned she might. My stomach tightened. Concerned enough to hire investigators. Concerned enough to protect you. For the next hour, Michael carefully explained what Robert had done. None of it was illegal. None of it was dramatic. It was simply thorough. Painfully thorough. Years earlier, Karen had apparently approached Robert privately. At first, she hinted. Then she suggested. Eventually, she directly claimed that Dylan might be Robert's biological son. The accusation had stunned him. Not because he believed it, because of who was making it. My own sister. Robert never told me. Not because he wanted secrets between us. Because he hoped the issue would disappear. Instead, he quietly verified the facts. When inconsistencies appeared, he hired professionals. Everything had been documented. Everything had been preserved. Everything had been legally reviewed. By the time he finished investigating, he knew exactly where he stood. And he had taken steps to ensure no false claim could threaten me after his death. Why didn't he tell me? I asked. Michael leaned back. Because he knew what it would do to your relationship with your family. That answer sounded exactly like Robert. Always protecting people even when they didn't deserve it. The attorney handed me another folder. This contained certified copies of the relevant records. I opened it carefully. There were legal documents, affidavits, professional reports, chain of custody records, everything organized with military precision. Robert had prepared for every possible challenge, every possible accusation, every possible manipulation. For the first time since Karen arrived on my porch, I stopped worrying. Not because I knew every detail, because I knew Robert had already done the hard work. The truth was protected legally, thoroughly, permanently. After the meeting, I drove home feeling lighter than I had in days. The grief remained. Nothing could change that. But the fear was gone. Unfortunately, Karen wasn't finished. Not even close. The first sign appeared 3 days later. My phone began ringing. An old cousin from Virginia called. Then another relative from Tennessee. Then a family friend from church. Each conversation followed the same pattern. Awkward greetings, long pauses, careful questions. Eventually, someone would ask, "Is it true about Karen's son?" By the fourth call, I understood exactly what was happening. Karen was telling everyone, not privately, publicly. She was spreading her version of the story before facts could catch up. Robert used to say, "Rumors travel on highways while truth walks on foot." I finally understood what he meant. Within a week, people were whispering. At church, at the grocery store, at community events. Most people remained polite, but I could see curiosity in their eyes. Some believed Karen, some didn't. Most simply enjoyed the drama. That's human nature, especially in small towns. One Sunday after service, a woman I had known for 20 years approached me. She lowered her voice. "Linda, if you ever need to talk." The pity in her eyes nearly broke my heart because she already believed there might be truth behind the story. I smiled politely. Then I went home and cried. Not because of Karen, because Robert wasn't there. Normally, he would have known exactly what to say, exactly how to make me laugh, exactly how to remind me that gossip eventually burns itself out. Instead, I sat alone in our kitchen. The silence felt enormous. A few days later, my parents came to visit. This time, they entered the house. My mother sat at the dining table. My father stared out the window. Neither looked comfortable. Good. They shouldn't. Karen says you're refusing to cooperate, my mother finally said. I almost laughed. Cooperate with what? The situation. There is no situation. My father's jaw tightened. If Dylan is Robert's son? I interrupted him. Have either of you seen legitimate evidence? They exchanged a glance. That told me everything. Number. They hadn't. They simply believed Karen because she was the younger daughter, the vulnerable daughter, the daughter who always needed rescuing. That pattern had existed our entire lives. Karen made messes. Everyone else cleaned them up. Karen made mistakes. Everyone else excused them. Karen created problems. Someone else became responsible. For decades, I accepted it. Now, I saw it clearly, and I was tired. Very tired. When my parents left, the distance between us felt wider than ever. The following week brought another surprise. 3 veterans who had served with Robert stopped by unexpectedly. Retired men, gay-haired, weathered, good men. We sat on the porch drinking iced tea. Eventually, one of them mentioned the rumors. I braced myself. Instead, he smiled. Bob always said, "Truth doesn't rush." The others nodded. He used to say, "Truth arrives exactly when it's supposed to." For the first time in weeks, I laughed that sounded exactly like Robert. The visit reminded me something important. Not everyone believed gossip. Not everyone was waiting for me to fail. Some people remembered character. Some people remembered decades of honorable behavior. Those people mattered. A few days later, Attorney Benton called. His voice sounded unusually serious. "Linda, I wanted you to hear this from me." My stomach tightened. What happened? Karen has officially filed a legal challenge. I closed my eyes. Of course she had. The rumors, the pressure, the demands. They had all been leading here. She wasn't backing down. She was taking the fight to court. The line grew quiet. Finally, I asked the question sitting in my chest. Should I be worried? Attorney Benton answered immediately. No. His confidence surprised me. But you should be prepared. Prepared? That word again? The word Robert had built his entire life around. As I hung up the phone, I looked at the folded American flag displayed in my living room. Then I looked at Robert's photograph beside it. Karen thought this battle was about money, about property, about inheritance. She was wrong, very wrong, because she was about to discover something my husband understood better than anyone. Never go to war against a man who spent 32 years preparing for battles. The courthouse sat in the center of town, a red brick building that had stood there longer than most of the people walking through its doors. On the morning of the hearing, I arrived 20 minutes early. Robert always believed arriving late was a sign of disrespect. Even after his death, I could still hear him saying it. The air was cool, the sky was clear. And despite everything that had happened over the previous weeks, I felt strangely calm. Not confident, not happy, just calm. Karen, on the other hand, looked confident enough for both of us. When she entered the courthouse, she walked as though she had already won. My parents followed behind her. Seeing them there hurt more than I expected. I wish I could say otherwise. I wish age made betrayal easier. It doesn't. At 67, family wounds still cut just as deeply as they did when I was 17. Karen spotted me immediately. She smiled, not warmly, triumphantly. The same smile she wore on my porch. The same smile she wore when she waved those papers in my face. Last chance to settle this privately, she said. I simply looked at her. No. The smile faded. Good. For the first time, she looked uncertain, only for a second. Then it disappeared. Attorney Benton arrived moments later, carrying several folders. He greeted me politely. Then we entered the courtroom. It wasn't some dramatic television courtroom. No shouting, no surprise witnesses bursting through doors. Just a small county courtroom filled with ordinary people handling ordinary legal disputes. Yet somehow this room felt more intimidating than any television drama, because this was real life, and real life carries consequences. Karen sat at one table with her attorney. I sat beside Benton. My parents occupied seats in the gallery. A handful of curious spectators watched from the back rows. Small-town gossip had clearly done its work. The hearing began. Karen's attorney spoke first. He presented her claim carefully. According to their argument, Dylan was Robert's biological son. As such, they argued he possessed inheritance rights. The attorney referenced DNA evidence, family connections, estate interests, financial fairness. Listening to him was surreal. They discussed my husband as though he were a legal puzzle instead of a human being. A decorated veteran, a husband, a father, a man I loved for 43 years. I kept my eyes forward. I said nothing. Then Karen took the stand. For nearly 30 minutes, she repeated her story. She sounded convincing. Very convincing. She had clearly practiced. She spoke about sacrifices, hardship, single motherhood, missed opportunities, financial struggles. The courtroom listened carefully. At several points, I noticed sympathetic expressions. Karen knew how to tell a story. She always had. Then came the DNA test, the document that had started everything. Her attorney held it up confidently. This confirms the biological relationship. Karen nodded. Certain, she was finally winning. Attorney Benton remained seated, completely expressionless. That should have worried her. It didn't. The judge reviewed the document, asked several questions, then nodded toward Benton. Your response? Benton stood slowly. The room became quiet. Very quiet. Your Honor, he said. Before discussing the submitted DNA report, we'd like to address its origin. The next 40 minutes changed everything. One fact at a time. One document at a time. One question at a time. The confidence slowly drained from Karen's face. The DNA report had problems. Serious problems. Missing verification. Missing chain of custody records. Missing independent authentication. Missing critical documentation. The more Benton explained, the weaker the report became. Then he introduced Robert's evidence, certified records, verified documentation, professionally obtained reports, everything properly preserved, everything legally admissible, everything prepared years earlier. Karen's attorney objected repeatedly. The judge overruled repeatedly. The pattern became impossible to ignore. One side brought assumptions, the other brought proof. Then came the investigator. The same investigator Robert had hired years earlier. A quiet, professional man with decades of experience. He testified calmly, methodically, without emotion. Exactly the type of witness judges trust. He explained timelines, interviews, verification procedures, record reviews. Every answer strengthened Robert's position. Every answer weakened Karen's. The turning point arrived shortly before lunch. Benton introduced evidence showing multiple inconsistencies in Karen's claims, dates that changed, stories that shifted, statements that contradicted previous statements. The courtroom atmosphere changed instantly. People stopped leaning toward Karen. They started leaning away. Even the judge's expression hardened. For the first time, Karen looked frightened. Not nervous, frightened, because reality was finally catching up. When the hearing resumed after lunch, the outcome felt inevitable. Yet, the most painful moment had nothing to do with legal documents. It involved Dylan. Until then, he had remained silent in the gallery, 19 years old, confused, embarrassed, clearly caught in the middle. The poor kid looked exhausted. At one point, the judge asked a question that exposed another contradiction. Karen stumbled. The answer didn't make sense. Everyone knew it, including Dylan. I watched his face. Watched realization spread slowly across it. The realization that his mother may not have been telling the truth. The realization that his entire understanding of the situation might be wrong. My heart broke for him because none of this was his fault. Not one part of it. He hadn't asked for this. Hadn't started this. Hadn't benefited from this. He was simply trapped inside it. By late afternoon, the judge rendered a decision. The challenge was dismissed completely. No inheritance rights, no claim against the estate, no claim against the house, no legal basis for further action. The ruling was decisive, clear, final. Karen sat motionless. Her attorney looked defeated. My parents looked stunned. The spectators exchanged whispers, and I felt absolutely nothing. No victory, no excitement, no satisfaction. Only sadness because winning didn't bring Robert back. Winning didn't restore trust. Winning didn't erase betrayal. Winning simply confirmed what Robert already knew: the truth. As people began leaving the courtroom, Karen remained seated, frozen, her world collapsing around her. My parents approached her cautiously. Neither seemed to know what to say. Neither seemed prepared for this outcome. Then I noticed Dylan. He stood slowly, looked at his mother, looked at the floor, then quietly walked toward the exit. Karen called his name. He didn't stop, didn't turn around, didn't say a word. He simply kept walking. That moment hurt more than anything else that day. Not because Karen lost, because a young man had just lost faith in someone he trusted. And that kind of loss changes people. Outside the courthouse, reporters weren't waiting. No dramatic crowd gathered. The world kept turning. Cars passed. People went to work. Life continued just as it always does. Attorney Benton shook my hand. "It's over." I nodded. "Is it?" He hesitated, then smiled sadly. "Legally, yes." I watched Karen emerge from the courthouse several minutes later. Her shoulders slumped, her confidence gone. For the first time in weeks, she looked small, very small. And as I stood there watching her, I realized something surprising. I didn't want revenge anymore. I wanted answers because somewhere beneath all the lies was a sister I used to love. For the first time in nearly 2 months, my house felt quiet again. Not peaceful, just quiet. The rumors had mostly stopped. The legal battle was over. The court had ruled. The evidence had spoken, and Karen's claim had collapsed completely. From the outside, it looked like I had won. But victory is a strange thing when you're grieving. Every morning, I still reached for the other side of the bed. Every afternoon, I still caught myself listening for Robert's truck in the driveway. Every evening, I still looked toward his favorite chair before remembering it would remain empty forever. The lawsuit had distracted me. Now the distraction was gone. Only grief remained. 3 weeks after the hearing, I sat on my back porch with a cup of coffee and reread Robert's letter. I must have read it 20 times by then. Each time, different sentences stood out. That morning, one paragraph caught my attention. "Do not let someone else's dishonesty turn you into someone you no longer recognize." I stared at those words for a long time. Then I continued reading. "The truth will protect itself. You don't need to destroy people after it wins." That sounded exactly like Robert. Throughout our marriage, he never confused justice with revenge. Most people do. Robert didn't. He believed accountability mattered, but he also believed bitterness was a prison. I folded the letter and looked out across the backyard. The oak tree he planted 20 years earlier swayed gently in the breeze. I suddenly wondered how Karen was doing. Not because I cared about her legal defeat, because I cared about what came afterward. That afternoon, I received an unexpected answer. My mother called. The sound of her voice surprised me. We hadn't spoken since the courthouse. Not once. "Linda." "Yes." There was a long silence. Then she began crying. Not dramatic crying, the quiet kind, the exhausted kind, the kind older people do after carrying regret for too long. "We made a terrible mistake." I closed my eyes. Part of me wanted to hang up. Part of me wanted an apology. Part of me wanted answers. Instead, I listened. My mother explained that Karen had moved out of her rental home. Money problems had become serious. Legal fees had consumed much of her savings. Several relationships had collapsed. People she expected to support her had disappeared. The sympathy she enjoyed during the rumors vanished once the truth emerged. That tends to happen. People love drama. Few people stay around afterward. "And Dylan?" I asked. My mother's voice broke. "He's not doing well." That hurt more than I expected, because throughout this entire mess, Dylan had been the one person who never deserved any of it. 19 years old, trying to figure out adulthood, trying to build a future, and now carrying public embarrassment he never asked for. After the call ended, I spent the rest of the day thinking about family, thinking about consequences, thinking about Robert, mostly thinking about Robert. By evening, I knew what he would have done. Not immediately, not easily, but eventually he would have shown mercy. Not because people earned it. Because mercy says more about the giver than the receiver. 2 days later, I drove to Karen's apartment. The complex sat on the edge of town. A modest place. Nothing fancy. Nothing luxurious. The kind of place people choose when they're trying to start over. I sat in my car for several minutes before walking to her door. When she opened it, she looked older. Much older. Not physically, emotionally. Her confidence had disappeared. The woman standing in front of me looked exhausted. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then she stepped aside. "Come in." The apartment was clean but sparse. A couch, a table, a few photographs, nothing else. Life had clearly changed. We sat across from each other. The silence stretched. Finally, Karen spoke. "Why are you here?" Good question. I wasn't entirely sure. Maybe because Robert would have come. Maybe because I was tired of anger. Maybe because life feels shorter at 67 than it did at 27. Probably all three. I wanted to understand. Karen laughed bitterly. Understand what? Why? The single word seemed to hit harder than any accusation. For a moment, she looked away. Then tears filled her eyes. The first genuine tears I had seen from her since this began. Not courtroom tears. Not sympathy tears. Real tears. The kind people cry when they're finally too tired to lie, and then slowly, the truth emerged. Not the legal truth. The emotional truth. Karen wasn't motivated by hatred. She was motivated by envy. For decades, she had compared her life to mine. Compared her relationships. Compared finances. Compared opportunities. Compared outcomes. While Robert and I built a stable life, she struggled. While we saved money, she accumulated debt. While our marriage endured, hers collapsed. Each year widened the gap and each year increased her resentment. "It wasn't supposed to go this far," she whispered. I almost laughed. Every disaster begins with those words. It never is. Karen wiped her eyes. I kept telling myself I was doing it for Dylan. But you weren't. She nodded slowly. No. For the first time, she sounded honest. I was doing it for me. The admission seemed to drain something from her. Years of resentment, years of excuses, years of blame gone just like that. For a long time, we sat quietly, two aging sisters surrounded by the consequences of choices made over decades. Eventually, I asked about Dylan. Karen lowered her eyes. He barely speaks to me. That answer hurt because I understood exactly why. Trust takes years to build, minutes to destroy, and a lifetime to rebuild. Before leaving, I handed her a business card. She frowned. "What is this? A counselor?" Karen looked surprised. "You're helping me?" I stood. "I'm giving you an opportunity." She stared at the card, speechless. Then I handed her another envelope. This one contained information about a community college scholarship fund. Not money for Karen, money for Dylan. A chance for him to move forward. A chance to build something better than this mess. Tears returned to her eyes. Why? I smiled sadly, because after everything that happened, I finally understood something important. The best revenge isn't watching people suffer. It's refusing to become like them. The first sign that healing had begun came 6 months later. Not with a dramatic apology. Not with a grand family reunion. Just a simple phone call. "Would you like to have lunch?" It was Karen. For a moment, I considered saying no. Old habits die hard. Old wounds heal even slower. But life has a way of teaching difficult lessons as we age. One of those lessons is that pride rarely improves anything. So I said yes. We met at a small diner halfway between our homes. The same diner where our parents used to take us when we were children. The place hadn't changed much. The booths were worn. The coffee was strong. The waitresses still called everyone honey. Karen arrived early. When I walked in, she stood up. For a second, I saw the younger sister I remembered from decades ago. Not the woman from the courthouse. Not the woman from my porch. Just my sister. Life had humbled her. In some ways, that was painful to see. In other ways, it was necessary. We talked for nearly 2 hours. Not about the lawsuit, not about the inheritance, not about the lies. We talked about ordinary things, health problems, gardens, weather, retirement, the kinds of conversations people have when they're finally tired of fighting. Eventually, she looked down at her coffee cup. "I owe you an apology," I waited. Not because I doubted her. Because some apologies need room to breathe. "I hurt you." "Yes." "I hurt Robert." "Yes." Tears filled her eyes. "And I hurt Dylan." That was the first time I heard her say it, the first time she fully accepted responsibility. No excuses, no explanations, no blame, just accountability. I nodded. That's true too. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was honest. And honesty was something our family desperately needed. Over the following months, small things began changing. My parents started visiting again. At first, the visits were awkward. Very awkward. There were long pauses, careful conversations, subjects everyone avoided. But gradually the tension eased. One afternoon, my father asked if he could help me repair a section of fencing behind the house. It wasn't really about the fence. We both knew that. It was his way of saying he was sorry. My father belonged to a generation that often expressed love through actions rather than words, so we spent an entire Saturday replacing fence posts. Neither of us mentioned the courthouse. Neither of us mentioned Karen. But when he packed his tools at the end of the day, he stopped beside his truck. I should have trusted you. It wasn't a speech, just one sentence. Yet it meant everything. A few weeks later, my mother apologized too. The tears came quickly. The regret came even faster. At 79 years old, she had finally learned something difficult. Believing your child doesn't always mean helping them. Sometimes real love means confronting the truth, even when it's painful, especially when it's painful. As for Dylan, his future slowly began improving. The scholarship fund helped him enroll in community college. He worked hard, much harder than most people his age. Perhaps adversity had matured him. Perhaps embarrassment had motivated him. Maybe both. Whatever the reason, he began building a life separate from the chaos that nearly defined him. One afternoon, he stopped by my house. We sat on the porch where this entire story had begun. The same porch, the same rocking chairs, the same view, yet everything felt different. He looked nervous. Finally, he cleared his throat. I wanted to thank you. You don't owe me thanks. Yes, I do. I smiled. No, you don't. He looked away. I believed things that weren't true. That wasn't your fault. I should have asked more questions. I shook my head. Dylan, when adults lie, children often trust them. That's not a character flaw. That's human nature. His shoulders relaxed slightly. For the first time, I saw peace in his eyes, and that made me happier than winning any lawsuit ever could. Several months later, our church hosted a ceremony honoring local veterans. The event included the announcement of a new scholarship program, the Robert Parker Memorial Scholarship, created for military families and young adults pursuing higher education. Veterans attended, neighbors attended, church members attended, so did Karen, so did my parents, and so did Dylan. As I stood behind the podium looking out at the crowd, I realized something. The house had never been the true inheritance. Neither was the money. Neither were the investments. Neither were the legal documents. The real inheritance Robert left behind was something far more valuable. Character, integrity, patience, preparation, truth. Those were the things that survived him. Those were the things still shaping lives long after his death. After the ceremony ended, I drove alone to the veteran cemetery. The sun was beginning to set. Golden light stretched across the rows of white markers. Everything felt peaceful. I carried a small bouquet of flowers, nothing fancy. Robert never cared much for fancy things. I stopped beside his grave. For several moments, I simply stood there thinking, remembering, missing him. Then I smiled. You protected me one last time, I said softly. The breeze moved through the trees. Somehow that felt like an answer. I looked down at his name carved into the stone. Then I thought about everything that had happened. The lies, the lawsuit, the betrayal, the forgiveness, the healing. And I realized something that might help anyone listening to this story. If you have a family, keep your estate plans updated. Protect the people you love. Put important documents in order. Don't assume everyone will do the right thing after you're gone. Preparation is an act of love. But there's another lesson too. Never allow money to become more important than character. Inheritance can build families or destroy them. The difference isn't found in the will. It's found in the hearts of the people reading it. And if you've ever been betrayed, disappointed, or hurt by someone you trusted, remember this. The truth may move slowly, but it arrives. And when it does, let it bring wisdom instead of bitterness. That's what Robert taught me. That's what saved our family. And that's what I hope stays with you long after this story ends. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to reflect on the people who matter most in your life. Share this story with someone who might need its message. And if you'd like to hear more stories about resilience, family forgiveness, and finding strength through life's hardest seasons, we'd be honored to have you join us.